Imagine the rustle of the Nile's waters rising during the flood, the banks turning into temporary ports, the sharp scent of smoke from the bread ovens, and above all, the rhythmic tremor of thousands of bare feet on packed earth. In this soundscape there is no spatial silence, no roar of spaceships. There are living worksites, a meticulous organization, skills honed by experience. The myth of extraterrestrials came much later, when time's distance made ancient works seem almost inhuman and our gaze, seduced by mystery, forgot how powerful a shared idea among a community of craftsmen, architects, and transporters can be. The Great Pyramid rises not as a signal sent to the sky, but as the collective signature of a civilization that aligned calendar, river, and stone. The numbers, which seem magical, are in fact deeply human. The Pyramid of Khufu, built around 2550 BCE, was born from a worksite that in a few decades managed to move about 2,300,000 limestone blocks with an average weight of about 2.5 tons, with special elements, such as the granite beams that bear the load above the king's chamber, that could exceed 50 tons. The local limestone blocks came from quarries northeast of the Giza Plateau. The finer, dazzling white casing that reflected the sun came from Tura. The hard pink granite was extracted from Aswan, hundreds of kilometers to the south. Transport relied on what the Egyptians knew and controlled better than anyone else: water. During the flood season, the Nile's canals and branches turned the landscape into a logistical network. Barges loaded with stone moved up and down to temporary docks at the base of the site, where wooden sledges dragged the blocks along packed and moistened tracks. Wetting the sand was not a ritual gesture but a technical solution. It reduced friction, stabilized the wave front of the particles, and made the sled slide more easily. It's the kind of detail that disappears in mythical tales but determines the success of an enterprise. The precision of orientation, with sides aligned to the cardinal points within just a few arc minutes, recalls not cosmic antennas but shadow sticks, taut ropes, and methodical observations of clear desert nights. An expert observer, measuring the midpoint between the apparent movements of a star near the pole, could find true north with remarkable accuracy, especially if the measurement was repeated several times and transferred to the ground with cords and stakes. The base, a square of about 230 meters per side, was leveled with mastery we now attribute to sophisticated instruments, yet could have been achieved with water channels used as a natural level. If the water's surface is horizontal, it provides a perfect reference to level the entire platform. Every choice speaks of adaptation and control, nothing extraterrestrial, just rigorous method. But how, in practice, does one lift such a mass? Theories about ramps abound, and perhaps more than one was adopted at different stages of construction. A straight ramp would have required enormous volumes of earth. More plausible is a combined solution: spiral ramps around the perimeter, external ramps that rose and were dismantled, intermediate platforms, wooden levers and sleds. At each level, the site reorganized: teams placing, teams finishing, teams carrying mortar and water. The stone did not fly, it slid, rolled on temporary rollers, was lifted in small increments with levers and centered patiently. The dark dolerite stones used as hammers to shape and strike tell of an industry of effort and repetition, not the instant intervention of unreachable technology. There is direct evidence that human beings worked here, with names, shifts, even humor. In the relieving chambers above the king's chamber, left by team leaders, are inventory marks and cartouches. Companions of Khufu, the drunkards of Menkora, labels of work gangs, recording placements, orientations, inspections. Elsewhere on the plateau, a workers' village with dormitories, bakeries, breweries, butcheries, food waste pits, and simple cemeteries tells of daily life. High-calorie diets, fractures healed with basic immobilizations, teeth worn by sandy bread, but also inscriptions calling these men friends of the king, not chained prisoners. The story of slaves whipped up slopes is a modern fantasy imported into the Nile Valley. The bodies and objects, the most sober of documents, tell another story. Among the most precious testimonies is a logbook written on papyri found on the Red Sea coast. A foreman recounts supply trips from an inland Nile port to the Tura quarries, noting days, loads, waiting times. He doesn't describe lights in the sky but ordinary problems to solve. When the boat leaves, where it unloads, who takes charge of the block, how logistics align with the site's needs. It was administration, not science fiction, that held the Great Pyramid together. And mathematics? We love to find pi and the golden ratio there, as if the whole monument were a blackboard of universal constants coded by a superior mind. In reality, the basic measure is the royal cubit, about 52 centimeters. Using it, they counted sides, derived slopes, and defined modules. Some proportions may appear close to magical values, but it's easy to fall into retrospective illusion. Among thousands of measurements, some relations emerge by coincidence or constructive good sense, not from a will to conceal messages. The Egyptians mastered volumes, areas, slopes, and fractions with notable skill, and their mathematics was perfectly adequate to produce the elegance we perceive. Then comes the recurring objection. Yes, but the precision, the scale, they couldn't have done it with copper tools alone. Yet hammered and hardened copper cuts soft limestone effectively. For harder phases, the technique changes. They score, split, and crack stone with wet wooden wedges that, swelling, open gaps. In the granite quarries, dolerite hammers carved channels in sequence, a long, laborious, but repeatable choreography. Blocks were worked as much as possible at the quarry to reduce weight and irregularities. On site, they were trimmed and placed. The art lay in repetition and quality control. A misaligned casing edge is seen in the play of light. An imperfect joint is felt by touch. A wrong slope is revealed by how water fails to run. It's a tactile and visual feedback system, not digital, but no less effective. To all this we must add the symbolic dimension, which has nothing alien about it precisely because it is rooted in deeply human drives. A pyramid is not just a building. It is an axis linking the dead king to the cosmos, a ritual mechanism in stone organizing processions, offerings, and calendars. The alignment to cardinal points and, perhaps, certain circumpolar stars did not serve to send interstellar messages but to inscribe power into the fabric of the sky visible to those living along the river. The very form, concentrating mass and force upward, made the structure stable and durable, fit to withstand sand and wind. It is technology serving an idea, just like today's great radio telescopes. We don't call them alien, yet to future passers-by, they might seem inexplicable if memory of our workshops were lost. So where does the urge to invoke star visitors truly come from? Perhaps from the ever-present temptation to underestimate our predecessors' skills. Perhaps from the aesthetic anxiety we feel before a beauty we can no longer reproduce with our hands, preferring to attribute it to beings we imagine more powerful than ourselves. Yet it is precisely in the details, in the traces of red paint used to mark alignments, in the barefoot prints dried into a ramp's mud, in the foreman's scratched note. This block fits here, that the great enterprise fills with faces and voices. There the aliens vanish, and the Egyptians remain, with their tenacity and their ability to coordinate thousands of people in a state project uniting religion, economy, and the art of building. And it is by following these voices, not the whispers of stars, that we understand how one can raise a mountain of stone without levitation or tractor beams, but with shifts, rations, ingenuity, and a river that sets the rhythm. Let us then step into the worksite, as if the camera were gliding through its sections. At dawn, specialized teams arrive from the dormitories. Some check the nearby quarry and report which limestone layers are more regular. Others prepare the gypsum mortar. Some keep the main track moist. Others tend to the sledges, replacing worn runners and frayed ropes. Meanwhile, the surveyors renew the reference points. Cords knotted at standard intervals, stakes driven in to mark the lines of the next course. Every few rows, work stops and measurements are taken. The margin of error is never allowed to grow, because a few millimeters of deviation at the base means centimeters at the top. The rule is not infallibility, but continuous correction. Moving toward the quay, we see boats arriving with blocks from Tura. The captain hands over a register, number of blocks, estimated weight, origin, date. The haulers fasten the sledges with ropes twisted from plant fiber. Men at the front open the path, pulling in unison. Others on the sides steady the load with levers, while one behind realigns the sledge if it veers. Every 10 meters, an attendant pours water from a jar onto the track. The sliding planks, reinforced where wear is greatest, are replaced in rotation. Higher up, carpenters prepare wedges, shims, and small inclines for micro-adjustments. When the block reaches its level, a master builder checks the corner with a wooden square and plumb line. Mortar is added where needed, removed where it bulges. The block settles into place with a full, brief sound. The surfaces meet. This choreography, repeated thousands of times, is anything but blind. Nearby, scribes record man days, rations, accidents, replacements. The site's physicians set dislocations, immobilize fractures with splints and bandages. Storekeepers calculate stocks of bread and beer, the caloric fuel that sustains the effort. The image of a people crushed by tyrants does not hold up to the evidence of these micro-stories. No system based solely on coercion can produce such precision for so long. It takes consent, professional pride, the promise of social and religious reward. The pyramid is the pinnacle of a complex economy that absorbs and redistributes labor and resources, an investment justified not by material efficiency but by the immortality of the sovereign and the stability of the realm. When we reach the inner chambers, the care becomes minute. The so-called Grand Gallery, with its corbelled walls, is a corridor that diverts lateral loads and leads the visitor toward the symbolic axis of the monument. Above the main chamber, successive layers of granite slabs form relieving chambers that redistribute weight. Higher still, a gabled roof of massive inclined beams deflects the pressure to the sides. It is structural engineering born of intuition and experience, trial and error. Lessons learned from earlier pyramids, applied corrections. The pyramids that collapsed or tilted were not alien failures, they were human prototypes that taught. Snefru's bent pyramid, whose slope was changed mid-construction, is a lesson carved in stone. When one realizes the risk is too high, the angle is softened and the structure saved. The global similarities argument, pyramids in Mesoamerica and elsewhere, sometimes resurfaces as proof of a single cosmic design. But the pyramidal form is the simplest way to build upward with stone or brick without advanced knowledge of arches, stability, weight distribution, gradual reduction of section. Different civilizations facing the same physical problem found similar forms because gravity's laws are the same everywhere. No interstellar fleet is needed to explain technical convergences. It is enough to note that the pyramid is masonry's safety cone, a balance between vertical ambition and static security. And, above all, their uses differ. Terrace temples, ritual platforms, royal tombs. The apparent resemblance dissolves in differences of function, technique, and symbolism. Legends of impossible techniques thrive where traces are scarce. Yet here, traces abound. Quarry platforms with extraction grooves, roads reinforced with gravel and mud, signs of earth dumping where ramps curved. The idea of an internal spiral ramp fascinates many, but it is not necessary to explain everything. Likewise, a single external ramp would be inefficient. The reality of the worksite was hybrid, pragmatic. They used whatever suited that stretch and level, dismantling and reusing material, extending or widening as needed. If one ramp consumed too much labor, it was supplemented with local inclines and lever systems. There was no single formula, there was a repertoire. Even the debate about the stellar shafts, those slanted ducts from the inner chambers, has often been stretched. Their directions allow for astronomical interpretations, but they are no oracles of contact with other worlds. They belong to a ritual language linking the king to the imperishable stars, the ones that never set. That some shafts are blind or don't reach the exterior does not make them meaningless. It makes them part of a symbolic program that does not align with our expectations of ventilation or function. The Egyptians, like every culture, wove together technique and myth. To believe that an act of faith equals a superhuman technological secret is to confuse different planes of meaning. At this point, the question turns around. Not, how could they have done it without aliens? But, what cognitive gains do we make if we set aliens aside and look closely? We discover a chain of knowledge. Quarrying and cutting stone, organizing labor in seasonal shifts, designing in modular units, metrological control with standard measures, managing supplies and flows along waterways, preventive maintenance of tools, occupational medicine, even motivational communication. Those joking team names carved on the blocks are a form of corporate culture ante-litterum. We discover that a society can focus its energy on a common project for generations, generating a flywheel effect, where each worksite improves upon the last. So why does the extraterrestrial hypothesis remain appealing? Because it offers a narrative shortcut. It explains in a flash what in reality requires slow, layered explanations. It's a story with invisible protagonists that erase the flesh and blood artisans. But it robs us of a deeper pleasure. Understanding how a complex system works, feeling almost in our hands the weight of a block and the resistance of sand, imagining the satisfaction of a master builder when the plumb line perfectly matches the mark. It's no coincidence that many miraculous theories ignore accounting papyri, kitchens, bones with signs of healing, fragments of rope, humble objects that don't sparkle on screen, yet hold the key. Finally, there is a subtler level. To attribute the great works of the past to aliens is to strip our ancestors of their merit, and to deprive ourselves of a horizon. If we convince ourselves that certain things are possible only with outside help, we stop demanding of ourselves to be worthy of them. The lesson of the Giza Plateau is the opposite. It shows that an immense, seemingly impossible project can be achieved by breaking it into solvable problems and coordinating diverse skills. It is a dose of realism that does not extinguish mystery, it relocates it. The mystery is not, who came down from the sky, but, how can a human community transform belief, geography, and physics into a masterpiece? If we listen to the wind passing through the aligned blocks, we don't hear the tongue of another planet. We hear echoes of measurements, commands, songs to coordinate the pull, laughter during breaks. In the evening light, the pyramid's shadow stretches like a giant's ruler, and its edge seems perfect because thousands of hands agreed to correct invisible flaws course after course. That is where true magic lies, not in the flight of a starship, but in the years-long convergence of attention and care. If we truly wished to contact someone, we could say the pyramid already speaks. It doesn't send coordinates into deep space, but transmits a far more challenging message. Collaboration can defy time. And that message, however ancient, remains the most futuristic we can receive. If you enjoyed this journey, leave a like, write a comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to support what we do. Your presence truly makes a difference. Until the next exploration.